everybody. Happy December 9th, 2021, almost Christmas vacation. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to our Creating Effective PLCs. I'm just realizing that my, there we go. Maybe my video is on, maybe it's not. But anyway, it's Karen Mazzo here. And nice to see you all, or to not see you all, but assume that you're there. We have about 20 people on today, so we're really happy to have you. And next slide, Heather. So I just wanted to introduce Heather Jenkins, and she will be delivering a bunch of information today. And she's our data and math director here at Performance Plus. Oh dear, at Demonstrated Success. So we're just happy to have her. And there's me, and I'm Karen Mazzo, the PD director, and Annie's with us today. Sorry, Anne, but we call her Annie.
Annie's just fine. Hello, everybody.
Anne Wallace, the DOE, who's just a wealth of information and a wonderful person. So thanks for joining us. And then Jenny couldn't make it today, but there she is, Jenny Cavalieri, our ELA specialist at the New Hampshire Department of Ed. And we just want to say thanks to the DOE because we get to provide all this wonderful free professional development thanks to the Department of Ed. This is the last of our 5 webinars on PLC. Okay, you're all muted, but we would love it if you asked questions in the Q&A. And then also if you have any information to share for all to see, you can put that info, links and stuff in the chat. Tomorrow you'll get an email with a PD certificate, with a link, sorry, that will lead you to a PD certificate and a recording of this webinar and PowerPoint and some other documents. And all of our, this whole series of webinars is also posted on our YouTube channel. So feel free to go there. And without much further ado, I'm going to hand you off to Heather. So thank you, Heather.
All right. Thanks again to everybody for coming today. We appreciate your time. This is our agenda for today. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to be starting with just a little bit of a review of PLC. It makes sense for those folks who haven't been on every single one of the webinars, and just so that you can get an understanding of the flow of information that we've already discussed. So we'll do a little review. Then we're going to talk about some progress monitoring strategies, a little bit of post-assessment and sharing and celebration, and wrapping up our whole PLC series today. The first part of reviewing PLC is, again, we know we have tons of data. We have very little time to do a lot of things in our day. So we want to be able to be as efficient as possible. And PLCs are a way to do that. Just a review of the 3 big ideas of PLC. Again, ensuring that students learn. The second one, a culture of collaboration. It's huge. And 3 is we're going to make sure we're always focusing on results. When we talk about the driving questions of PLC, we want to make sure that we're answering these questions. What do we want our students to learn? How will we know when they have learned it? What will we do when they haven't learned it? And what will we do when they have learned it? So we're going to go through that whole cycle in sort of speedy form today. When we talk about PLCs, we want to make sure that what's really understood by folks is that is a whole school community that we're talking about. It's not just individual grade levels or individual teachers looking at data to inform instruction, but it really creates this whole data culture in a school and involves the whole school community, right? So it may not just be your classroom teachers. Make sure that you're involving all your other specialists in the building. The more people that you have as a part of PLC, and having them understand the shared goals and purposes and vision, the better your results are going to be. If we're talking about PLC, we have to talk about John Hattie. He is an educational researcher, and he has looked at the influences on education and learning in students. He's done a lot of years of research on it. His main goal was to look at 1 year's worth of work equal to a year's worth of growth. So he looked at all the influences, and then it has created what's called the Hattie effect. On the left-hand side, you have reverse effects on learning. And as you move sort of over to the other side where the blue is, you're getting increasingly better effects on the desired effects for learning for students. So a lot of times we do look at what are going to be the biggest influences. And as you can see over on the right-hand side, the collective teacher efficacy is one of the highest influences on students' learning and the desired effects and positive student learning. So just a general gist of what collective teacher efficacy is, it's really those teachers working together. What I want to stress is that they're not only working together to make sure that all students are learning, but that appropriately high and challenging expectations is key, right? Especially with what has been happening over the last couple of years in the world, in our education, and how challenging it has been. We want to make sure that we continue to set the bar high for students and not just continue to lower the bar so that our students meet expectations, right? We want to make sure at our grade level, we're still looking at those high expectations and working together so that students can continue to make that growth and that impact of what a year's worth of work and a year's worth of growth will look like. So teacher efficacy and PLC are hand in hand. As we set up PLCs in our schools, one of the biggest things we need to do in the beginning is create successful teams. We want to make sure our teams are as efficient and working together for common goals. And so these are the 6 components of successful teams. We look at creating norms and roles in a positive climate. We look at consistent protocols. How are we going through this process and making it easy for people to understand what to do during different portions of the PLC process? Creating clear communication plans, and in those, making sure that they have all these shared, articulated, and measurable goals. We're going to talk a little bit about the types of goals that you might have, whether it be a year-long SMART goal or a specific cycle goal, but we want to make sure that everything is understood by the team for what our end goal is going to be for the year. Throughout that, we also have an accountability process. So we make sure that all the team members and people involved know what they're supposed to be doing and are held accountable for what their part of that puzzle or piece of the pie is going to be. And then making sure that you have defined timelines throughout. I know it's really hard in education right now, keeping to those timelines. We tend to push out a lot of our assessments or really trying to make sure to spend more time to cover skills, but we also want to make sure that we're balancing that with what really needs to make sure is learned by students for a particular school year as well. It's not an easy balance for sure. So what happens in a PLC cycle is you're going to start with highly effective research-based core instruction. Within that, you're going to systematically identify students who are not succeeding in the core program. And then you're going to provide these students with additional time and support until they master those targets. So here is our quick little grid. I'm going to show you this again a little bit later when we're talking about all of our progress monitoring. But really what we're doing is we're teaching new content. We're assessing learning, we're reviewing data, looking at instruction. Are they ready to move on? If they aren't, we're going to discuss more instructional strategies, reteach differently, and do that whole cycle again until they're ready. When they're ready to move on, we're going to discuss some new instructional ideas and strategies, extend learning, and then we're going to start that all over again. So what happens in these PLC meetings is a lot of times the beginning of PLC work is you're going to identify those essential learning targets. What do you want all students to learn? Then you're going to create, find, and correct common data. Once you have given those assessments, you're going to then review the data. You're going to determine which students need reteaching or might need enrichment. And then you're also, throughout this process, this is the big portion of it. It's one little bullet that's second to the bottom, but this is huge. It's discuss the students, talk about instructional strategies, share new ideas, and plan for instruction. I always say in PLC, teachers you need to check your ego at the door, because you need to be really open to what other people are doing in their teaching practices that might be working better than what you might have, or really looking at, I know that this has worked for you in the past, maybe it's not working now, or maybe this is just a different subset of kids. So really being able to talk freely with your group of educators that's in your PLC to talk about those instructional strategies is really important. After we figured this out, or while we're doing this, we need to articulate SMART goals, right? We're going to look at data. You have to look at your standards. We all think we know our standards, and we probably do, but really always dig right into those standards, figure out what your power standards are, and continue to really look at teacher input for that. So as we're articulating SMART goals, if we're doing a full PLC for a full year, we tend to do a year-long SMART goal so that you have, a target for your end of the year. In doing that, you're going to look at some type of data. We tend to look at historical data. This just happens to be New Hampshire SAS data for the last 3 years that the students were tested. You could look at NEWA data, you could look at STAR data. The important part of this is to figure out historically, where have your students been low, right? It's not necessarily this particular group of students dependent, I guess, I don't know if that makes sense, but a lot of times when you take your current year's students out of it, you will see what trends are for where you might be lacking over a longer period of time. So you might be able to make some little tweaks to your teaching and they'll make a big difference. So we tend to look at historical data for the year-long SMART goal. Figure out, what does this data tell us, right? When we're doing that, we tend to use the data-driven dialogue protocol. We have found this to be invaluable when looking at data. So we follow this protocol pretty much to a T for the different phases. We're predicting, observing, interpreting, and inferring. Then we look at implications for practice. And then as we're doing that, we reflect and we move on again. We have a protocol that's the data dive short form. So as we're looking at data, we always use this particular form so that people can have a place to be able to put their thoughts so that they're able to talk together. It's very important, I have found, to have each one of these phases has a little bit of time where you're silent and then time where you're sharing. The silent time is key so that you're allowing everybody to have their own thoughts before they start sharing. It really has provided to be an amazing way to get everybody to really think about data, and not everybody thinks about it in the same way, but if they're given that space, they're able to really articulate what their thoughts are and what they're seeing. We have a form to help you articulate your SMART goals. And you would create then a year-long SMART goal based on the data. As you are looking to move into your school year and start implementing instruction to be able to meet your year-long goal, you have different cycles. So within a cycle, you will do the same type of process in that you will have a pre-assessment now. This is for your students for this particular year. We have a template that you can capture the information on. You will be giving and administering a pre-assessment. This just happens to be New Hampshire SAS modular data, but whatever your pre-assessment would be, and you're going to look at that particular data and what is it telling you for that particular cycle. So this data directly correlates with my year-long SMART goal. right? So we're looking at cycle 1. This is correlating with what my goal would be for the year. I go through this same data-driven dialogue, the same data dive short form, and I articulate a SMART goal for that cycle. Right. So now I'm looking at one particular cycle, a little subset of that SMART goal. And now I have my SMART goal, and I'm going to determine my interventions that are related to that. So we have the PLC intervention planning document here. And in doing that, what we want to make sure when we're doing any planning is we've determined a specific standard or area of focus. So now we're really going to break apart that standard, right? We're looking at 5 NBT6. This is what the standard is telling me. I'm going to break apart that standard into its pieces, and maybe depending on where my students are at with this particular standard, I might focus just on place value or a specific subset of that standard. And now I'm going to be doing an intervention cycle with different groups on that particular portion of the standard. So now we've gotten to the point where this is our previous webinars have kind of covered the rest of this information, and we're going to start getting into now the progress monitoring portion. I just want to pause there for just a second to see if there's any questions that we have at this point.
There aren't any yet, Heather.
Okay, great. So moving on, then we're going to start talking a little bit about progress monitoring and some of those progress monitoring strategies. So just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, what is progress monitoring? So here's a little bit of information about progress monitoring. It is a systematic form of assessment in which student learning is evaluated on a frequent and repeated basis. The monitoring is done to evaluate effectiveness of instruction and intervention strategies. So this is maybe your intervention cycle is 6 to 8 weeks, maybe it's 8 to 10 weeks, but normally about that time frame between your intervention cycles. So the progress monitoring, just so that you know, is done throughout that PLC cycle. So we have our interventions, and now we're looking at the progress monitoring portion. When we're looking at progress monitoring, this is just some general information about what it could be. So it's going to be done at regular intervals. You want to make it as non-invasive as possible. You want to keep it really short. You don't want these really long assessments for progress monitoring to be done. That defeats the purpose of the progress monitoring, right? These are just short, keep it simple and done on a regular basis. You want to make sure that you record and chart everything for progress monitoring so that you can start to see what is happening with your students as you are teaching, right? What is working? Are they getting it? How do I need to tweak my instruction? And how can we continue to make sure that these students are making gains? You are doing progress monitoring on a targeted skill or skills that are being retaught, right? You want to make sure that it's easy to implement. A lot of times people make it really difficult, and they're doing all of these things for progress monitoring, and it's really hard to continue to implement it. So make it so that it's doable for you. And then make sure that it is changeable depending on student performance, right? Depending on what your students are doing or how they're reacting to the intervention and skills that are being taught, you want to be able to change what your progress monitoring might be, right? Or if a student is in a specific group and you're doing reteaching skills and you realize that this particular student has already gotten those skills, where is that student going to go from here rather than staying in that group for the remainder of the time? What it might look like. So some examples of what progress monitoring might be is just a 1-minute running record or fluency check for reading or math. It might be a few targeted problems based on specific skills. Make sure that those specific skills are defined by your goals for intervention, right? Everything goes back to what are my goals for this particular time frame. You might have some progress monitoring on work samples for writing. You might have small group work where teachers collect data while the students work, right? A lot of really great observational data. If you have a specific focus for that observation, is great progress monitoring information. And sometimes you're conferring one-on-one with a child and taking observational notes as well. When we talk about progress monitoring, there's also a lot of times you'll see the acronym CBM or curriculum-based measures. Those tend to be the most effective types of progress monitoring, are those curriculum-based measures. So where do you find some of these progress monitoring tools and information? There, we just have a couple of sites here that are available out there. This Easy CBM, it's a free, they have a free or a light version, they call it. It has progress monitoring measures, and you can also enter student data and use the reports within Easy CBM. So if I go to this website, I just wanted to show you a little bit of information here. So they have this light version, which I signed up for, and has a lot of really great information. You can also subscribe. I was just fine with the light version. So if you log in, you can start to see where you'll enter your students in here. Here's some of the measures that they were talking about. So there's some just general information for reading here and for math. And then also, if I go back to my dashboard, here's my reports. So if I am looking at this, I can put in my individual student data. So if I went to these measures here, you can enter your scores if you are using any of these passages. So that's Easy CBM. The next one that we have here is the RTI Action Network. They have a lot of free resources. You can choose specific grade spans, and it has information on progress monitoring and data collection. So if I go just quickly to this site, here's what it looks like here. You actually don't need to log in to this site. I'm sure there's a paid version that I'm not using at all, but I just went, if I wanted to go to K-5, you can click here, and it just has just some really general information here about RTI and all sorts of interventions in math. I clicked on progress monitoring, and I went here, and you're able to see some of just the general information that they have about progress monitoring. And then the last one that we have here is the What Works Clearinghouse. So if I go to this, here's the information that we have in some of the resources from the What Works Clearinghouse. And just some general information and some videos and graphics on different types of evidence-based either programs or tips for learning. In addition to these websites where you might be able to do some data collection and to also look at some progress monitoring measures, there's some other online tools that have been built or that are also good progress monitoring particular sites. IXL is one of them. It's been around for a long time. They have math, ELA, social studies, and science now. Edmentum is also another one that they have all subjects. It's if you're familiar with Exact Path, that's what Edmentum is. It's again all subjects. The McGraw-Hill, they have math there and accelerated math. In reading, we have all of the links here to these particular sites. Some of them have free versions, some of them you do need to sign up for, but they all have some really great progress monitoring portions of their system built in to the programs. Just some examples of how you might chart progress monitoring. I have the next few slides are just different ways that you might be able to capture the data. It really is a lot of your personal preference of how you like to capture it. The key is to capture it and be capturing the same type of data so that you're able to look at the progress over time. That's why it's called progress monitoring. So this here tends to be, it's a mathematics. You could be putting anything in here on this shell. This just happens to be a math example. So it's giving you the specific academic area, what was used for the baseline, and then the current level of functioning. And then you can see where it has intervention cycle 1, 2, and then the results there. So you can also, perhaps there's maybe some progress monitoring charts that would be attached as well that are just quick little charts for students and how they're doing within a particular intervention cycle. This here is the progress monitoring chart that might go with that. And so you can see the dates along the bottom and then where that particular student is in that on those particular dates and how they're looking over time. Here's a sample CBM graph. So that's that Easy CBM website. And so you'll be able to see what the student performance is and how they've performed over time within that particular progress monitoring area. So because they're able to have you enter in the information right on that website, you're able to create these really nice reports easily once the data is entered.
Can I jump in, Heather, for a second?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you stay right there for a moment? I just wanted to point out to anybody on the call who has Performance Plus, there is a progress monitoring module or piece of Performance Plus that you can access right from the student detail page that will create a graph that looks just like this, as long as you put in the date and each subsequent score. And I have found that the hardest thing about this sort of graphing of data is it really forces you to hone in on the skill that you're trying to grow. And you have to be able to make it measurable. So, and that sometimes takes a few tries, and some things lend themselves better to it than others. For example, reading fluency, fast fact fluency. Those are things that are super easy to quantify. You're saying per minute, little Joey started at 60 words per minute, right? 60 correct words read per minute. And that was on Monday. And then the following Monday, it was 72 correct words per minute. And then on the following Monday, it might be 40 correct words per minute. And that's really easy to graph. There's other things like around reading comprehension where you really have to think like, what's the skill that I'm intervening on? Okay, I'm intervening on inference, right? So it's not, you can't graph reading comprehension, right? Or you could do, however many questions correct out of the total, right? Or something like that. But this process really forces you to think about what skill you're trying to teach and what you can measure. So I just want to put that out there. And if you bump up against that as a challenge, that's perfectly reasonable. And if you ever want to talk about it, Heather and I obviously are happy to talk with you about that.
Great.
Done. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Karen. All right. Another example of how you might chart your information are with conference notes. This just happens to have it's a checklist here. And it allows you to figure out how, what they're doing for this particular, this is a collaborative discussions conference log, and it's looking at speaking and listening skills. So there's a lot of different information out there and different types of progress monitoring charts and sort of tools for that. But like Karen said, a lot of times your chart or your tool is also directly related to what you are looking at for skills for your particular progress monitoring time. This one is a fluency progress. You can see what the specific readings were for this particular child and how they were doing with their fluency. So again, as we're looking at progress monitoring, I just wanted to bring up this particular graph again, because the progress monitoring that we are doing, if we are ready to move on, say we've done all of the progress monitoring, we feel like our students are ready to move on, then what we're going to do now is, again, we're going to do that assessment of learning. So we had our pre-assessment that was our big assessment, right? We do all our little checks in between that are those progress monitoring. And now we're ready for that post-assessment to see how students did. So I'll just pause there to see if there's any additional questions or thoughts that people have for progress monitoring before we move on to the post-assessment.
I don't see anything, Heather.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you. All right, so as we start looking at the post-assessment, I just wanted to talk about and make sure that you understand what the components of a good post-assessment would be. First off, the post-assessment needs to match your pre-assessment, right? If you are not looking apples to apples and your pre-assessment was testing, a subset of skills, but your post-assessment isn't assessing that same subset of skills, then you aren't going to be able to get valuable data to be able to say whether you've met your goal or not. So those two assessments really need to match. And I always use the term apples to apples. Your post-intervention assessment, again, same skills that led you to the intervention in the first place, right? So it may be that you had a pre-assessment and it was a large assessment, and then now you're taking it. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to say, let me take that pre-assessment that we did and just take a portion of that and use a portion of that for a post-assessment, because that's what our intervention cycle was looking at. So it doesn't have to be the whole big assessment again. It can be a little bit of a subset, but just make sure the skills that you are looking at for that intervention are reflected. Okay, same thing that I was just saying. So use the pre-assessment as a guide. Some of the questions could be the same as that were on the pre-assessment, as long as you weren't doing direct instruction on exactly how to solve that exact problem, it would be fine. I do find that if you are doing any sort of reading assessments, that if you give them the exact same reading assessment and it's the same passage or the same book, that it isn't really apples to apples, because they have already read that particular passage or book. So just be a little bit careful about that. And then if you are really trying to figure out how to do one of those post assessments, just make sure you create or find one that's really similar. So the best choice would be an exactly comparable assessment with either different words, numbers, or format to it. Okay, so once you figure out and have your post-assessment, we have the post-assessment information form. And really this is just, it's very similar to the pre-assessment, where you're just going to describe the assessment and attach a copy of it. One of the big things with PLC that is the most valuable is that all your information is in one place. We have a PLC binder. For a lot of sites, it is a physical binder. It's a 3-ring binder and they put everything in it. There's also sites that don't have that physical binder. They have a Google Drive and everything they have is on the Google Drive. So just make sure that all the information is right in that spot so that anybody who is part of this process coming in at any point can know what was done and see everything. It also helps you if the following year you start to go through this process again, and maybe some of the things that you're going to be using for your strategies or activities or for your assessments are going to be similar. At least now you have the copies of them so that you could reuse them. So here's my post-assessment data. This again happens to be grade 5 assessment data that would be the modular that the students would take again. This is my data after I've gone through that particular cycle, and you're going to figure out what does the data tell you. As you're doing that, it's pretty predictable. You're going to go right through that data-driven dialogue process again. We do refine this a little bit. Karen and I were just talking about this before we were starting, in that sometimes you don't necessarily do the prediction phase. You definitely do the observation phase. You want to interpret the data, figure out any sort of inferences, see if you have met your goal. So a lot of times what ends up happening is you have your SMART goal right out in front of you so you can figure out what your particular goal was, what percentage of, you know, that you needed for students to be proficient in, or whatever you were looking at. And then you're really taking a peek at what did it look like to start with, and now what does it look like now? This is that data dive short form. Again, you may or may not be doing each particular cycle to fruition as you're looking at a post assessment, but we definitely use this as a guide for any data dive that we do. And that's basically it for the post assessment. I'm not sure, we probably don't have a ton of questions about that, but I know maybe one of the questions might be, what if we do the post assessment and we figure out that students aren't meeting the goal, right? What happens a lot of times, I feel like when folks go through an intervention cycle, is that now they're moving on, right? You have to move on. We can't continue to work on that particular goal because now we're on a new unit or we're doing something different. Well, the way that we really try to have folks look at this is because we've created that year-long goal, and we've gone through that one intervention cycle, we have the ability, because we have a focus on a specific area of instruction, that if students haven't met that goal, we are going to continue during that intervention time to be able to try to make sure that students are meeting that goal. So we aren't spinning our wheels as much because we aren't necessarily moving on to a whole new set of skills. It's just building on the skills again to be able to reach that end of the year goal. So you want to continue. If students haven't met that goal, you have to go back. You have to really look at your teaching strategies, maybe expand out a little bit more of what the standards are and look at a little bit different area of that standard and figure out ways in which you can ensure that all students are learning. So I'll just pause there for just a second, Karen, to see if there's any questions before I move on to the end.
No questions, Heather.
Okay, thanks. All right, so this last part, this sharing and celebration, I want to, there's only a couple of slides here, but I just want to make sure it doesn't diminish the importance of this particular portion of the PLC cycle. So I have here this evaluation and celebration. We have a form for this. There's a couple of different forms. There's also a PLC cycle checklist that has some of this information on here as well. I put this one in the presentation today because I just like that it, you're going to answer the questions. Did you reach your goal? If you didn't reach your did you not reach it? Explain what went on, what went well, what might you have done differently, and just make sure you're celebrating that. For sharing and celebration, just a couple of reminders that I have here is in schools, we tend to only focus on the really big successes, right? We don't necessarily celebrate the little successes and the little bit of growth, but I guess the point is for me, and what I want to make sure that everybody understands is that even those little tiny successes, any success or any growth is worth celebrating. So you want to make sure that you do celebrate that. If you don't meet your goal, what can you celebrate? Great. Well, we didn't meet our goal, but we had this many students that are really doing well and are ready to move on. You have to celebrate that. If you don't, it's just, it becomes this vicious cycle of feeling like you're not being effective. So make sure you're celebrating all that you can. So I feel like celebration shouldn't be limited to individual grade levels. We talk about this PLC being a whole school initiative, a whole school process. So make sure your successes aren't limited to just having a grade 4 team feeling really successful that this particular cycle of intervention went well. They should be able to share that with all the other grade levels. The more you share about your PLC process and your celebrations and your growth and what you're working on, the more of that data culture and that collaborative community you're creating, right? Just because I might be a 5th grade teacher doesn't mean that I'm not interested in what the 4th grade goals are, right? Everybody is interested. And it also gives people a really good understanding of what other grade levels are working on, where their successes are, and so that they're just really all invested in this particular process. And a part of the sharing is figuring out the pitfalls and what's happening when we're creating our data culture. It would be great if you could start doing PLCs in school and just have this all be like, yay, everything's working really well and everything is, we're a well-oiled machine and everything, we just implemented it and it went really well. It would be great if that was the case, but this all is a continuous process. So on these last few slides, we just put some things together that as you're starting to implement PLCs at your schools, what some of those pitfalls may end up being so that you're able to help really, really set yourself up for success. So possible pitfall number 1 is the norms aren't defined, right? So if you have your grade level teams, right, you need those norms defined. You need to build trust, right? That's how you do it, right? You want to make sure that everybody is included. Those norms are oftentimes created so that everybody in your particular grade level team is really feeling included or able to be a part of this process. It allows people to take risks and it encourages a productive communication in the groups. The last thing you want is for every single time you have these PLC meetings is for one person to completely derail the conversation or not be ready or not really helping the group move forward. So those norms might be one of your pitfalls. The second one might be a lack of team goals, right? You want to make sure that you keep an eye on the prize and what that goal is. And then what is your goal for this particular cycle? And that creates that urgency and everybody working towards the same end goal allows you to keep that focus. And again, you want to celebrate those small successes and wins, right? So we want to keep doing that. The third one that might be a possible pitfall is a lack of trust. It's really hard for teams that don't trust the process and don't necessarily trust their teammates, right? So, and it is also, I've worked myself on a lot of teams where we have a particular goal and we were worried that if we didn't meet that goal, that there would be some sort of consequence for that, right? So we want to make sure there's no blame. It's not punitive if teachers don't make their goals. We're doing the best we can to be able to have them meet their goals, right? And also start looking at where I was saying, check your ego at the door. If somebody is really good at teaching a specific skill, they need to be, those people who may not be as good at teaching that skill need to be open to hearing what some of those teaching strategies might be, and really starting to collaborate on what we're doing to ensure that all students are learning, right? It's really hard, especially for those of us who have been teaching for a long time. Change is hard. Nobody wants to feel like they're not doing a good job. It's not that we're not doing a good job. It's let's figure out our focus to make sure that the job that we are doing is really having a positive effect on the most amount of students as possible. And again, use the data, right? We have here, use the data, it doesn't lie. It definitely doesn't if it is the right type of data. So I'm going to keep that on our radar. Number 4 for a possible pitfall of implementing PLCs, again, is that lack of communication. Making sure that people are open and honest and communicating at all time, that schedules are put forth. Everybody knows what the timing of the schedules are. They're aware of where the dates are. The dates are sacred. It's not, oh, I have an eye appointment today. You should have your dates defined, make sure that they're held sacred and you're doing it all together. So, and here's where we have top-down versus shared leadership, right? This, I will say, for PLC to work, everybody needs to be invested, right? If you are an administrator and you're trying to implement PLCs at your buildings and you're not going to PLC meetings, you're not asking your teachers about PLCs, you aren't looking at meeting minutes, and you aren't interacting with your teachers in that manner, it's going to be difficult for them to really buy in, right? So you want that to be able to, so if you're a teacher and you're thinking that your administrator has really got their mitts in everything in your classroom and in your PLC, you also need to look at that as we're creating a whole culture of collaboration, so everybody should be on board with it. The number 5 pitfall is the lack of essential learning outcomes, right? We need those power standards. We need those essential skills. We need to look at the standards, right? We need to know what those are so that we know that our trajectory to get to a specific goal is a goal that we should be doing for our particular grade level, right? It is one of our skills. It's one of our standards, right? If you don't have that, then you don't know where to aim. And it must be everybody is teaching the same topic, skills, and standards. It's not my classroom. I interpret it this way. So I'm teaching it a completely different skill than in this particular classroom in my same grade level. Everybody needs to really be on board and understanding and interpreting those standards. And then when you look at the common data, you must be looking at it from the same assessments, right? I can't have one assessment in my classroom and somebody else have a different one in their classroom. It's the same thing for progress monitoring. It would not really make sense for me to be doing progress monitoring in my, 3rd grade classroom that's different than somebody else's progress monitoring in their 3rd grade classroom. You want to be able to look at all of that data together. So these are the things that are great to have when it comes to PLCs, right? You need teachers who believe in the process. I should also put administrators that believe in the process, right? Teachers need to have the ability to create their own assessments or know where to find those really good common assessments that they need to have. It really helps to have someone who really is invested and likes to format data and create reports and to be able to look at results. There seems to be 1 or 2 people usually on every team that's like, oh, I'm the data person. If you don't have that, then you want to see what you can do to make sure that somebody on your team is able to do that, because a lot of times the formatting of the data and how you're looking at it makes a huge difference. So that's always good to have. And I know we have some small schools out there. You need at least 2 or 3 participating adults. And, you know, if you're the only one teaching that, then pull in an administrator, pull in no joke, anybody that can help you look at data. They don't even need to know exactly what skills are being taught, but when people look at data and they're figuring out sort of where they see some possible gaps, you want more than one person doing that. So make sure you have more than one person on your team. That's why it's a team, right? Okay, any questions at this point? This is pretty much wrapping it up. So I'm just going to pause here for just a minute and allow anybody who wants to ask questions to be able to do that. We'll stay on for a little bit. I'll just get through the next couple of slides and we will stay on and see if anybody has questions. So this is the last one of our PLC series webinars. We will have some other webinars coming up a little bit more after the first of the year and towards the spring timeframe that have to do with the New Hampshire SAS Summative Assessments. There might be some other ones in there. So continue to peek at your inbox and your email to see anything that might be out there. All of these, again, these webinars are going to be available on our Demonstrated Success YouTube. If you're not sure how to get there, there's a link right on the Demonstrated Success website, and there's also a link on the DOE website for these PLC webinars. And then, no, we really want your feedback. We have been getting some great feedback from the first webinars in this series, and we've made some little changes here and there. I think I said that even the last time. So a little survey will pop up when you log off of this Zoom. And if you could answer the survey for us, we really want to improve our webinars and want to see if you have questions, you can also put them in there. We take a peek at all of the comments and we try to reach out to anybody who might still need some information. So definitely fill that out when you log off this Zoom. And then our last slide here is my information. Again, Heather Jenkins. Karen Matzo is also from Demonstrated Success. We have Annie, who is your math person at the DOE, and Jenny, who is your ELA person at the DOE. So you can reach out to any of us with any questions that you might have. And other than that, we'll just hang on for another minute or so to see if there's any questions.
Heather, I don't see any questions.
Okie doke. Sounds good. I can see some people are probably logging off too. So reach out to us if you have anything. And other than that, until we see you again.
Thanks so much, Heather. Great job.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Heather.
everybody.
All right. Take care.
Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.